I'd like to welcome you all cordially to the first panel entitled Mind Bodies Environments, Anthropological Knowledge Making, the unstable worlds. The participants, the speakers are Professor Kirsten, Professor Klekot, and myself. And so I'd like to invite Eva to introduce and to say a few words about Professor Kirsten Hastrum.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and great honor to introduce you, Kirsten, here. I would like to be brief, but actually your academic bio is so extended that it won't be very easy for me to be brief. But basically, Professor Kirsten Hastrum, as her study area, chose so-called far north. And she studied both Iceland, where she began her passage to anthropology actually, and Greenland, where she has already been working for almost 2 decades, with a special focus on northwest Greenland. It is in Greenland where in 2009-2014 she ran a major comparative project called Water Worlds, dealing with social responses to climate change across the globe. A total of 15 researchers and 15 fields were part of this effort, out of which a number of collective volumes have sprung. The project has contributed both empirically and theoretically to dissolving the dualism between nature and society, as Kirsten Hastrum herself has once stated. Since 2014, Kirsten Hastrum has been involved in an interdisciplinary project called the NOW Project, Living Resources and Human Societies around the North Water in the Thule area in northwest Finland. And Kirsten Hastrum's work on Iceland resulted in 3 monographs published between 1985 and 1998, and numerous articles. In some of them, she problematizes the status of field experience and of resulting knowledge, which she then developed in her highly inspiring and deeply insightful book, A Passage to Anthropology, published in 1995. Anthropology as an experience, relation between the interviewer and the interviewee, status of the field experience, knowledge construction in anthropology, both in textual and out of linguistic modes. These are only a few topics that she touches upon in her book. The construction of anthropological knowledge and relationality of positions in doing fieldwork speaks to her second field of anthropology interests too, the theater. From 1985 to 1990, Kirsten Hastrum's work focused on the relationship between the theater and anthropology, and this led to the partly autobiographical play Talabrot, presented by Odin Theater and in Holstebro and other locations worldwide over a 3-year period. The experience which she extensively discussed in Passage to Anthropology, pointing at its epistemological consequences for her understanding of ethnographic practice and anthropological theory. In 1996, she traveled to England to research the history of the Shakespearean theatre tradition in collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and then she published it in 2004, Action, Anthropology in the Company of Shakespeare. This book is an anthropological study of play acting. Hastrum offers a fresh perspective on performance and on the construction of the analytical objects. So again, experience, performance, and knowledge construction within unstable relational circumstances. These are only few highlights of what I am able to present now out of your huge work. And I have to add that I had a great pleasure and honor to translate A Passage to Anthropology into Polish, and some of Kirsten Hastrum's articles too. And her work has always been a great inspiration for me. So I am really delighted that I have this honor to present you and to invite you to speak at our panel. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to speak here about what I call the terrain of anthropology, and it's based on reflections from high Arctic Greenland. And I'm not using any any pictures or anything. This is a wordy edition here. The notion of terrain makes space for a renewed attention to the landscapes and histories from where the field emerges. As I see it, anthropological practices are always formatted by views of place and history. Looking back to my own field practices, mainly in Iceland and high Arctic Greenland, I have realized that the field is always scaled from inside out, in whichever direction the interests are drawn by people living there, including their sense of landscape and attention to history. The field is never just a place, it is a point of view. Within the relatively short history of anthropology, being basically a 20th century practice, unimaginable changes have occurred on our planet. When the founders of early anthropology traveled to remote places and produced the first monographs about other people, they operated in or constructed relatively small-scale communities. Bronislaw Malinowski was one of these. His Argonauts of the Western Pacific opened for a new way of dealing with the others. In the foreword to his book, Malinowski laments how, and I quote him here, just now when the methods and aims of scientific ethnology have taken shape, when men fully trained for work have begun to travel into savage countries and study their inhabitants, these die away under our very eyes. So Malinowski's observations may seem far away from the present era, but they are worth remembering precisely because the others were always disappearing. That's part of what we wanted them to do in a sense. 100 years hence, we are bound to address the increasingly volatile Earth system that reminds us about larger connections and new temporalities. Wherever we live and work, climate change is a part of the picture, as are other environmental traditions. The field, therefore, must be recognized as an intellectual practice as much as a geographical spot or location. This will be discussed now in 4 different views of the field, as vertical relations, as earthbound experiments, and intellectual laboratories, and finally as poetical terrains. I hope I can make it all within the matter within the vertical relations first, and they include microbes, little orbs, and musk oxen. Relations are of many kinds and unfold at different scales. Life itself depends on relations within and between species, and these relations may be solid or fragile, old or new, obvious or unseen, but there's no way around the fact that life implies relations. This applies to humans as well as animals, to microbes as well as musk oxen. My point of departure here is a large and mounting valley in high Arctic Greenland, home to multiple species, each with their history and dimension, from the deep and often ice-covered sea ice glacier to covered haze. The valley tells us how the livable Arctic emerged from the ice-covered American North and unveils the complex ground on which the new people walked for a long time, becoming part of a singular nature culture, including humans, as well as microbes and birds, seals, musk oxen, and other living species. Ruins of ancient stone houses in the upper valley reminds us about the place of humans in this story, possibly relatively marginal compared to the other living beings in the valley, but still central to the topography of the mountain slopes and the different levels of life. It unveils the complex ground on which the Inuit, that's the name for the northwest Greenlanders, and their ancestors have walked and lived in the region for millennia. For me, the valley opened up for new ways of sensing and seeing the landscape, and for expanding anthropological interests beyond the present. The valley sets the scene for life forms and sounds that struck me and eventually led me back to the deep history of lives and places, and to the fragility of well-known forms of horizontal thinking. I took some inspiration from Alexander von Humboldt and his personal narrative of a journey to the ethnological regions of the new continent, in which he expands on relations between plants and animals, and between life and immaculate nature. And he suggested, and I quote him here, "In the old world, the nuances and differences between nations form the main focus of the picture. In the new world, man and his production disappear, so to speak, in the midst of a wild and outsized nature. In the new world, the human race has been preserved by a few scarcely civilized tribes or by the uniform customs and institutions transplanted onto foreign shores by European colonists. Facts about the history of our species, different kinds of government, and monuments of art affect us far more than descriptions of vast emptinesses distant for plants and wild plants." Now, to get closer to the living species that burst out in my own wish to seek the connections between plants, animals, and humans, we shall start with the microbial level, not often presented in anthropological analysis, but very important to life, and not only in the Arctic. Thus, the first reports of microbes in glacier ice appeared in the early 20th century, but they were largely ignored until the 1980s, when a new interest in microbial communities at various ice cores took off, leading to a broader interest in the history of ice, and to a new understanding of relations between glacier ice viruses and glacier ice microbes. Also, we should not forget the often harmful algae blooms in global seas, threatening coastal populations and deep sea fish. The large copepods form an important link in the transfer of nutrients from algae to higher trophic levels. The population development among the copepods are seen to have accelerated and hence shortened the annual life cycles. This eventually have had effects on the large Arctic polynya called the North Water. From having even never known about copepods, one is suddenly faced with the fact that they are some of the most abundant animals on the planet and playing an important role in carbon sinking. Another pillar of this life cycle are the innumerable birds, like the common eider, the thick-billed murre, and the little auks. These species have played an important role for humans moving across the Smith Sound from North America to Greenland some 400 to 500 million years ago, finding the ice receding and the North Water opening. In many ways, the early birds, the birds that came first, paved the way for humans and other species ready to expand for more southerly destinations. The little auks still move into the region in late spring and make a new life world emerge for the summer period. It is overwhelming to follow their untiring will to shift their beaks, to fill their beaks from the sea to be able to feed the chicks, and we were covered beneath the rubble in the slopes. The naturalists that I was working with at the time estimated that some 3,000 millions of pairs bred on the huge colonies along the small coast of northwest Greenland. But a larger point about the little auks is to remind us that, along with other birds, they played an important role for humans moving across the Smith Sound from the Americas about 5 million years ago, finding the receding and North Water opening. They transformed the soil through fertilization and offered a rich foraging resource for other animals such as Arctic fox. Now that's enough with the small birds. But next comes the icebound experience or deep time. Fieldwork, as we generally understand it in anthropology, is earthbound in the sense that it literally takes place within a certain terrain. Anthropological fields differ vastly, not only in terms of geography and inhabitants, but also in their singular emergence out of deep time. This notion is owed to Richard Irvine, who emphasizes that the horizon of time and death are crucial dimensions of social life. It includes parts, movements of rising seas, folding hills, falling meteors, plagues, shipwrecks, and lots of other matters having shaped the terrains within which we live. So Urban's research in the East Anglia and Finland illustrates how working the soil connected people to the earth and still does. Thinking with deep time allows us to sense a new sense of history and life that can be seen as vertical counterparts to Gaston Deleuze's suggestions that the territorial void created by imperial ruination of large territories in South America covered up past life on the plains, while also leaving traces of the deep history. Cordelia saw his preliminary work as an ethnography at the edge of the world, but it turned out to be much more than that. As he worked and moved around in the region, he realized that the rubble he met with forced him to submit the very notion of field to a process of disintegration. This gave pause for thinking about the slippery nature of fieldwork, as I've known it myself from fieldwork in North Arctic and High Arctic Greenland over the past almost at least 20 years. In High Arctic Greenland, landing there in different seasons and finding a world of intensifying movements of many kinds. We need, I think, as anthropologists, to make it explicit, to make this explicit, to get a fuller picture of how deep time emerges from the debris that one finds all over the globe in imperial ruins or in rubble from communities run over by advancing colonizers in South America. We also find sunken vessels, crumbling airstrips, empty tar pits, and changing seas, reminding us about the need to acknowledge the power of the past within the present. A comparable, if different, ruination took place when an American air base was established in the Thule region in northwest Greenland in the early 1950s. It was a time for the Cold War and for a massive military rearmament between the US and the Soviet Union. The Thule air base happened to be strategically well placed in the missile line across the Arctic. In addition to the military airfield, a veritable under-ice city some 100 kilometers from the coast was planned. It was to be powered by nuclear power. Construction started in 1950. Tunnels were dug in the ice cap, living quarters made ready, and a library even made, and at least a nuclear reactor was installed to drive the entire city in 1960. Already by 1963 it was deactivated, and the following year it was removed. The constructors had overlooked the fact that the ice cap was a drifting mass, always on its way towards the sea. Tunnels and living quarters began to slide, and the ceiling of the reactor room became frighteningly close to contact with the reactor itself. This would have been fatal. The proud political and technological plan collapsed because the very landscape was not even understood. Today it seems believable. But whether formed by ice or magma, even the largest mountains are never rock solid. All of them are results of protracted geological processes, against which the rubble left by history seems so very small. The landscape is a temporary melting ground for uncountable times, processes, and potentials. It was included in the notion of the provoking landscapes in the previous section. If we add ruination to the equation, we further incorporate the political forces that affect the landscapes at a human scale. Ruins, as discussed, cannot be produced by anybody everywhere and at any point of time. It requires a lot of resources that are certainly not for everybody to orchestrate. Well, next for the intellectual laboratories and the thinking the field. To push the sense of the field even further, we may see it as an intellectual laboratory. It may have its own life, but it's for the ethnographer to make sense of it beyond practical interests. It is a process. Certain things are foregrounded, while others slide away. With reference to the High Arctic, we see how the geosocial relations that have formative life in northwest Greenland for thousands of years are now changing so rapidly that both locals and newcomers are totally baffled. While the hunters and their families must rethink their options from one year to the next, anthropologists must realize the idea of the field. Places are always elusive. The elusiveness of place fosters an uncertainty about the future. In the high Arctic landscape, where human life always unfolded in dialogue with place, as constituted both from within and without, through various pulsations of ice, materials, animals, and newcomers, there is a new sense of vulnerability. With the obvious meltdown of their environment, the Inuit are increasingly aware of their connection to the rest of the world. In fact, they were always connected, even when not yet known outside of the Big North, where they were discovered only in 1880 by John Ross. They had been closed off and forgotten in the northwest over some 300 years due to the Little Ice Age that prevented anybody to go that far north. Meanwhile, the southern parts of Greenland remained in contact with other countries such as Denmark and Norway. The Inuit were connected to the larger world through the rhythms of nature. The rhythms were manifested in several ways, positive and negative. The lack of driftwood during the Little Ice Age deprived them vital material for their sledges and harpoons. Wood had normally to be transported from the northernmost places, but suddenly it could not reach them, and all their gears were more or less, they were not worth it really. So it was only in the late 1860s that they were visited with a small group of kinfolks from Baffinland on the American side of the bay, that they found the available wood. It was taken over from Baffin Bay. As an old man told Knud Rasmussen, we taught them to build kayaks and to hunt from kayaks. Before that, they had only hunted on the ice and been obliged during the spring to catch as many seals, walruses and narwhals as they would want for the summer. And meanwhile, the number of Inuit, it was down to about 100 people, and that's a very small contingency to continue living there. But something happened a little in late 18th century. And now the Inuit are deeply affected by Anthropocene challenges, where changes in degree rapidly lead to changes in kind. Apart from the general ill-boding of global warming, the glaciers are increasingly covered by soot, precipitating their melt-off. The sea ice is no longer a trusted infrastructure, and the sea is polluted by industrial waste. Now, to end this part of my piece here, the anthropological protocol, such as it is, requires a direct engagement with the shifting world and its living people, while also demanding deep thinking. This leads me to Lévi-Strauss's discussion of the nature of fieldwork and his experience of sometimes wasting his life in the Brazilian interior in the 1930s. Revealing his sentiments about the field 60 years later, Lévi-Strauss admits that he preferred homework over the field, and without any pejorative intention, he suggested that fieldwork was work for the ladies, which was supported by the fact that they carried it out so brilliantly, and he was serious there. Maybe he himself did not have enough patience, he suggests. And I met him a long time ago, actually, and he was a very strange man, and he talked like this. It was really fantastic. But that's another matter. And now the poetical terrain, so we are getting closer to the end here. Not quite, but close. And it's about the economy of speaking. Lévi-Strauss was once portrayed as a poet in the laboratory. This speaks to the larger scene of ethnographic work in which I highlight here. Once a poet enters the laboratory, both conversation and writing change. This has a particular implication in the high Arctic, where I met with a very, very economical use of language. Communication is often silent, reflecting a shared fate of living and acting in a frozen world. and depending on living resources whose movements are increasingly unpredictable. The silence is akin to the condensed image of a poem, always a little above the significance of language, the language of signification. The poem evokes a sensation of fulfillment through a complete form rather than by narrative unfolding a plot. The elusiveness of the high Arctic landscape and the complexity of its challenges made linear narration difficult. Even Franz Boas, working among the Baffin Islanders in America, across the Baffin Bay from northwest Greenland, noted how these people were steeped in the Arctic landscape and displayed a strong poetical bent. Among the arts, he said, the arts of the Eskimo, poetry and music, are by far the most prominent. Besides the contents, their form is also very interesting, and most of them have been handed down in unchanged form, and their narration demands a great deal of art. Many traditions are told in very abridged form, the substance being supposed to be known. Well, in many ways, the high Arctic landscape still seems closer to poetry than epic. It's a landscape of such proportions that it cannot be folded into linear narrative, but must be experienced as a whole image compressing the vastness into intensity. The huge floating icebergs melting down from the high glaciers may turn round and remind the inhabitants of the power of nature. The town is now home to about 500 people, and the smaller settlements are almost, they are falling down now because there are too few to call it a settlement now. But there are the amazing icebergs, and every year a multitude of narwhals arrive to eat and to breathe. And not so long ago there was even a school on one of the little islands, and a teacher to take care of two pupils living there, but never for long. No longer possible. I mean, all of this here, and I say a lot more about the lived landscape in Avanaswak, which means the high art. But what I want to stress here is that the anthropological field bends and stretches in the process of understanding. We do what we can, but we can only understand it so far. And so do people's lives, that is, stretch, bend and stretches. And how should we write it in the first place? How should we write a kind of place that is like that, unbelievable? And writing cultures remains a challenge. It's an afterthought that cannot deliver facts about the past, only suggest a pattern. But then, and that's how we have to do it, but then truth is always partial. James Clifford cites a pre-hunter who had come to testify in court regarding the fate of his hunting lands in view of a new hydroelectric scheme. When he administered the oath, he hesitated and said, "I'm not sure I can tell the truth. I can only tell what I know." We should embrace that kind of thinking. At last it hits my way of thinking about my own slippery thinking about life in a high Arctic Greenland, where the landscape is never still and where the inhabitants are always in a process of unpacking the next series of unexpected events. Thanks to a long tradition of seeing the Arctic from the south, certain stereotypes are hard to shed. As noted by Robert McGee, the Arctic is, and I quote him, a place that is seen primarily through the eyes of outsiders. To most southerners, the Arctic remains what it was to their counterparts centuries and perhaps millennia ago, the ultimate otherworld. The challenge at present is to see the Arctic, including high Arctic Greenland, from within and give space to narratives, also other narratives than narratives of loss, which are often mainly the outsider's view. And now the final few sentences here about ethnographic futures and technologies of humility. The general message in my text here is that even the remotest of places, people are part of a shared world, historically and presently. Whichever the anthropological field, it is always fluid and challenges us to work at several scales, time and space, past and present, without losing sight of the specific. Hopefully this may help freeing us from inherited stereotypes of bounded fieldwork and open for a new conversation in anthropology about the uncertainty of knowledge without jeopardizing its authority. And I want to quote Sheila Jasanoff here. And she says, "We need disciplined methods to accommodate the partiality of scientific knowledge and to act under irredeemable uncertainty. Let us call these the technologies of humility. These technologies compel us to reflect on the sources of ambiguity, indeterminacy and complexity. This call for humility is a plea for policymakers to cultivate and for universities to teach modes of knowing that are often pushed aside in expanding scientific understanding and technological capacity." This, I think, is an important directive also to anthropology. And the call for humility brings up a memory of a conversation I had with a young man in Prague, whose catch of his first novel, From the Ice, I witnessed in the spring of 2015, when he was just 15 years old. He was celebrated by the entire community for his feat. Conversing him with some years later, he was eager to finish school so that he could educate himself further. I'd been under the impression that he truly wanted to become a hunter, with all that entailed practical skills and knowledge. But now he was set at training to become a carpenter at a school in the south. When asked why, he answered, "So that I can make my own tools for hunting. They're too expensive to pay." This, I think, is humility in practice. In fact, he never moved south. He stayed where he was, and he's now the most important young person among the hunters of Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, dear Professor, for this wonderful lecture. And now let me introduce Professor Eva Klekot. Professor Eva Klekot is our teacher. We are a generation of young scholars, young professors, or middle-aged, but we are taught by Eva, and we learn how to build a sort of critical anthropology thanks to her lectures and seminars. And Eva Klekot is an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, anthropologist of art, anthropologist of making, as she describes herself. She is also art historian, but also curator. She curated a lot of important exhibitions, collaborated with Museum of Warsaw, with the National Ethnographic Museum, and is also a magnificent translator, as we already heard. So it is really my pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and actually you have betrayed my age, so a disclaimer. I started teaching when I was 24. So I had the pleasure to teach your generation, but we actually are almost the same generation. Yes, I think that I would like to accompany my short speech with slides, because I have been for quite some time teaching design students. I have been working at the design school. So actually for me speaking without slides became unnatural. Sorry for that. And I would like to address what I found really inspiring in Tomasz's description of our panel. I would like to address this topic of uncertainty, change, liquidity, and unobvious socialities and ontological pluriversalism. Actually, I would like to address them via my perspective on craft. Craft practices of which I am a peripheral participant, actually observing and taking part in classes given by my colleagues and learned by my students. As you can see, I would like to share some thoughts on a craft as a way to learn anthropology as something that gives you insight about non-dualistic ways of knowing. What is it? This is porcelain that came out of a kiln in a porcelain factory, and of course by the supervisor of the production was judged as a failure. But actually, when we look at it, it's very interesting because we see that something happened to forms that had been designed, had been made, but then in the kiln something happened to them. What happened to them? Porcelain is a material that remembers. And it remembers any touch that it receives before firing. When you take out a porcelain cast out of mold, it's more or less as, you know, the powder for face in stone. It's really very fragile. So whenever a person taking it out of the mold presses it too much, it bends. But of course, when you are a worker in a factory, you work by number of pieces that you make. So you just put it back and you put it on the shelf as nothing has happened. But then, during the firing, the second firing, high firing, the porcelain betrays the touch. It remembers it and then it collapses. So actually what has, we will never know exactly, but this is a piece that resulted from different touches given to forms during their work, during their emergence as porcelain objects in a factory line, and then during the firing in the kiln. And I would like to, I'm showing it because I would like to ponder a little bit on what we really understand by creating, making the relationship between matter and form. In Greek, it is hyle and morphe, and we have the word hylomorphism. And actually, this is an Aristotelian and then traditionally West European understanding of what it means to make something physically in the matter. It means that you have a maker, and the maker in his mind idealizes the form and puts the form, forces the form over the inert matter that they know how to operate. So this hylomorphic idea of creation is actually something that we have been socialized to as a society for 2,000 years, all the time, hylomorphism. The form is in the brain, the matter is inert, and we put the form over the inert matter. We see it is not like that. Here, this is actually something that tells us, no, the form is in collaboration between the form and the matter, between the body and the matter. Because where is the form actually? It's not in an abstract mind. It's not in immaterial ideas. It is in the human body that actually collaborates with the material. Tim Ingold once wrote that he doesn't like the matter as an expression of materiality because matter is very general. And he's right, actually we always work with materials, not with matter. Any material has different properties, different features, different reactions to our touch, to our sensitivity, to our temperature. So actually what is a form? Form is a knowledgeable body in tune with the material. And this is actually where we have this uncertainty, change, and liquidity in the process of making. Actually, this is also what Kirsten once called muscular consciousness, something that is in your body and makes the body conscious of what the person is doing. We associate usually consciousness with the mind because of the Cartesian tradition. But actually the consciousness is in the body, and then we have this entanglement of materiality with the human body. We have this acting network, and then we have, as a result, we have an object emerging. For a while, the objects also have their lives and they change. When we think about the knowledgeable bodies, we have the problem because we have been socialized to a modern way of understanding the relationship between the body and the mind, which means Cartesian dualism. And this Cartesian dualism actually in modernity resulted in, again, dualism of skills associated with the body and knowledge associated with mind. And the expression of that in the area I am really working on is, among other expressions, is also this Hannah Arendt's distinction between homo faber and animal laborans. And actually, during my research on factory production, on porcelain factory production, I realized how really wrong that distinction was. Because although the workers in the factory, they are not authors of the whole piece since the beginning to the end, so in hylomorphic terms, they are not makers. But actually, they are makers, because at any stage of operating liquid porcelain, cast porcelain, dried porcelain, firing it, decorating it, they need to be really knowledgeable. Their bodies are as knowledgeable as the bodies of craftsmen, craftswomen, craft people that work since the beginning to the end on one object. Still, following this distinction, this Cartesian dualism in the sphere of making, what we really find is that the whole factory production has been developed, grounded in that understanding of hylomorphic way of creation. We have the mind that forces its ideas on inert material, which means we have the factory managers, we have the designers that force their ideas on the materials that are being processed in the factory, and on their way there are some human agents that actually are also treated as material part of the process. They are the body of the factory according to the principles of scientific management. The mind of the factory are the managers, the body of the factory are the workers, and of course this is straight about social hierarchy, about also power relationship in the factory. So I'm just referring to this, not making any deeper analysis because I have no time, but actually I wanted to point at how this craft observation, this doing anthropology by doing craft, can take us to strongly political issues, to strongly, fundamental epistemologies of modernity and of what we as anthropologists are living through, experiencing, but also researching. And then also in the factory, I realized that of course there is this kind of knowledge that is related to abstraction, to the possibility of passing the knowledge in terms of words, and then in terms of formulae, in terms of numbers, like recipes, right? You have always recipes in the factory. You have a person called main technologist that decides on recipes. But at the end of the day, who makes the recipe happen, as in the kitchen, it's the person, the human being. the human being that is operating either a tool or a machine, but it's always a human being. So actually it's a human body that is necessary for the process. So we need in the factory production both the techne, the knowledge that can be abstracted in numbers, but we need some other knowledge that I call metis. This word metis was used also by James Scott in calling traditional knowledge of peasant societies. I use metis for calling the knowledge that cannot be abstracted from the body, and that is actually a part and parcel of knowledge of a craftsperson, but is also, as I realized doing also my research in a factory, a part and parcel of any factory qualified worker. Anybody that is operating their machine or their device, they do it with their bodies, not with their minds. Their body is their mind, and they operate it with their bodies. So we need both techne and metis, we need both kinds of knowledges. So it means we need something that is non-dualistic way of knowing in order to make things happen in materials. And this is my last slide already. So actually I think that in this kind of operating with materials that are changeable, that are liquid, and that are really uncertain, because always working with materials you are not certain. I'm really pleased by what Kirsten has said. I'm not sure I can tell the truth. I can only tell what I know. This is exactly what any craft person would tell. I know how to make this pot now. If the clay is different, if the weather is different, if time is different, I will know other things. I will know how to make another pot in another circumstances. It's very localized knowledge and very embodied knowledge, the knowledge that cannot be abstracted from the body. That's why it cannot be taught in any other way than in practice. And that's why it changes with the body. Any human body is able to learn their own metis in different practices, and then like convoking this very special ontological pluriversum of making, which consists of, in my case, humidity, porcelain, well, in the case of clay, it's also what they call edaphone, which means all the microbiome that is living in the clay and makes it more plastic, more malleable. So all these elements of this really unobvious sociality, thanks to metis, they actually result in an object that is being made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irena, for this wonderful presentation. And now I try to follow your thoughts and Kirsten's thoughts. So let me continue, and I try to make 3 points. And first point is about my fieldwork in Wałbrzych, in southwestern Poland. So some of you probably know this story, but some of you don't. And this is the situation when I, for the first time, felt the excitement of creating my own anthropological tool and my own anthropological method. And I work with the people who lost their workplaces, their jobs in the center of Wałbrzych. So this is the story about huge, massive unemployment that emerged among miners in the middle of the 90s in post-socialist Poland. And here you can see the building of the authorities of one of the mines. It was with bitter criticism called Belvedere, which means presidential palace here in Warsaw. So I worked with those former miners, and they start to earn and to provide for their families after losing their jobs by many illegal economic activities. One of them was building sort of bootleg shafts, self-made shafts, and dig again for coal that was just beneath the surface. So they built the shafts around Wałbrzych, in the neighboring forests as well, but also in the middle of the town. And they started to accompany them and to work with them. And I was asking myself, what is important, what is really meaningful in this situation that I can find, that I can touch, that I can feel. And you can see that when I was working, I realized that there was a kind of contrast between this whiteness and blackness, and I gradually realized that's how much the black dust of the black coal is important. And when I was entering the shafts to help them, to work with them, they just said that please, I will borrow you my jacket, my dress, because you can get dirty inside. And later I realized that they also say something to their wives, their partners, that they won't come here to the shaft, to the pit, as they say, because they get dirty. And I realized that they are recognized as people who are working in this illegal bootleg shafts, because when they are coming back to their homes, everybody sees that they are covered with this black dust. And if they are taking public transport, they do not have to pay a fee for the ticket, because they are former unemployed miners. At the same time, they are not allowed to sit. And then I realized that there is something more important in them. That when they were working in the mine, they used to have sauna and showers, and they were going out to the city after the shower and dressed in their clean clothes. And this being in clean or in dirty, as they were saying, was something really important for them. So, for instance, they used different form, more official, when they were in clean than in dirty. So, just this kind of mechanism, which is so important for miners, I mean, being in clean versus being in dirty, has spread in the city, has spread in completely new circumstances. It brought another meanings, another symbolism. I suddenly saw, kind of stack of dirty clothes, the entrance to one's of the miners' flat in the old post-German tenement flat. I realized that he enters the flat, but he wife requires from him to leave all the dirty clothes at the doors of his flat. So I realized that the moment I realized the meaning of the dirt and of the tidiness and this really important social and symbolic context. But it is really important here is the moment that I gradually built a kind of internal organ of perception, that I was able to hear this, that I was able to notice these details, that I heard that my wife never comes here because she's afraid she gets dirty. So I felt that there is something more, that when I was coming down to this shaft, I realized that they hit the walls with pickaxes, and then they stopped their movement, and they are listening to the walls, to the pillars, to the timber beams, if they are cracking, if there is a threatening collapse of the pit. So they were listening to the pit, listening to the shaft, as they were saying. What is really important is that somehow extrapolated their bodies, collective, not only their own singular bodies, but kind of collective bodies, to the pit, and they were telling me that the pit, the shaft that is safe, is the worked one, as they were saying in Polish, robiony. That because they can feel, they can sense how the walls are moving, if there is something, you know, that if a danger may come, if there is something cracking inside, they feel, they sense. So that was the moment that I realized that I elaborated and built a kind of internal organ of perception that was even much smarter than me. And when I was, you know, also talking with students, I heard this kind of description that in this case, this was exactly what I also found in Kirsten Hastrum writings, especially later on in the text on muscular consciousness, that this is a kind of embodied skillfulness, but this is also the situation where we probably create a kind of ethnographic double who has the ability to teach us what is going on in the field. So there is a kind of a doubling, and this was really, really important for me. And another point I want to make is about writing and about the great story that I read in an article by Gisli Balsam and Marie-Lien about more than human ethnography. Maybe this is a story about Norwegian social anthropologist Frederick Barth, when he was asked in a film retrospective of his scientific works and life. He was asked about his most enjoyable moment, the event that he remembered from the film, and he really great theory of, you know, relational theory of ethnicity, etc., etc. He was working with Basri tribe in southern Persia, but he recalled the situation when he was very serious professor, as far as I know, but when he was talking about this most enjoyable moment, he recalled the situation when the nomads asked him to carry on newborn lamb, and they were migrating with animals, and he was carrying the lamb back on his shoulder, and this is the situation when he describes the moment. I mean that you can see that his face has changed. It is soft, it is tender, that his eyes are gleaming with joy, and he tried to show how he was carrying the lamp, and he also says about this, you know, heartbeat thumping against his neck, and that made me think about my first fieldworks in Mongolia, when I was collaborating with reindeer herders, Mongolian Tuvans, at the very north of Mongolia in Sayan Mountains. And remember that we were, you know, migrating with people, with animals, and I was leading a kind of caravan of reindeers with the staff, with the yurts on their backs, and we were going up to the very steep trail to the kind of pass, and I was, and we were riding these horses, so at some moment I had to just get off. We were riding these reindeers, and at a certain moment I had to get off the reindeer, and I was just walking alongside the animal up the trail, and it was really, really exhausting. And I remember that we had to make a stop in a certain moment and regulate our breathing. And I realized that after years, after 20 years, after reading this piece about Frederick Barth, that I still remember this moment of kind of companionship, that we were, you know, like you know, friends that are, you know, just walking in mountains, and they have to stop to regulate breathing, to have a rest, and I just realized how much I suppressed and erased my memory, and the fact that how much the relation with animals is important, right? So this is the moment, and this we can also just switch to Kirsten Hastrum teachings, right? On when she elaborated on the moment when a kind of ethnographic double appear in the field, and we can call this person in third person. We can call this subject as a sort of somebody who can be put in this grammatical form in third person, and this is really important. I mean, the question who I was during the fieldwork, who am I now? What is the self and what is the subject, ethnographic subject? This is not me. This is still somebody who I'm the subject. I'm the author of my thoughts, but at the same time there is a sort of involuntary memory, involuntary ethnographic activity, so to speak. So thinking about I recently found this photo of Kirsten. This was a kind of field game created by our great students around Easter. So there is the Easter egg, and you can see that there is kind of instruction about the lift, and this is quite old lift elevator. If you can go to any ground, to any floor you want, but there is also additional mysterious hidden floor. If you want to get there, just follow the guidelines made by Kirsten Hastrum. That is stated in this. Okay. So third point. Third point. So this really deeply theatrical narrative and moment in anthropological fieldwork that is related to our memories, to our consciousness, to sense of relatedness. This previous point that was really important for me. And now I would like to move to Mongolia and to the fieldwork that I conducted there. And this is the story about Togut nomads, Togut people at the very west of Mongolia, on southern slopes of Altai. And they suddenly felt the forces of rising hyper-capitalism in Mongolia, and they are really, really efficient and really well-skilled nomads, and they migrate in very long distances. And there were also some fieldworks conducted there by our teachers in the 70s, in the 80s, exactly in the same group. But when we came there again and started our new field work, and also knowledge coming from this research to Oyurgerel Tangat, who is with us, and so we did this field work together, and we faced the situation where everything has changed, and at the same time it stayed as it was. And it turned out that there are people who are nomads, who are herders, just started to set up their new businesses, trade making through the border with China, with Xinjiang province, and they started to also create they were just business people, and they started also their trade in the capital of Mongolia, in Ulaanbaatar, and they created small fortunes. In a certain moment, they also start to think about the little homeland, and there is their hometown of Bulgan on the west southern slopes of Altai. And they built a kind of network of business people, but also the network of Bulgans, of residents of Bulgan. And they started to act and create this kind of club that kind of network that they called Targodotat Club, both in Bulgan and in Ulaanbaatar. And you can see that they were also traveling through whole Mongolia by dozens. More than dozens, like 30 to 40 to sometimes 50 these fancy four-wheel drive cars through Mongolia to go to the hometown of Bulgan in order to celebrate, to make a kind of offering, make a kind of rituals that were devoted to local sacred mountains. And it was really important because they managed to create, to move from one occupation to another, from the herding to business making, but at the same time they still kept the sort of the spiritual landscape, and the herding was still essential. I mean, that this was so important to keep the herds. They were the most successful business people, the most successful even politicians. They are proud owners of large herds of animals. And there is a kind of very important cosmology of vital forces that are related to animals, to herding, to hunting, but this is also relating to horse racing. This is also relating to celebrating the local land by establishing horse racing, but also wrestling. And so they started to found and develop this kind of celebration, an offering that was held in autumn called Kahiga, also the celebration of the sacred mountains. But what was really important was the fact that the semi-desert and desert lands in between Ulaanbaatar and Bugan, in ontological sense, were disappearing, and they put a lot of the ontological strength to the very places of Bugan, to this hometown, to the sacred mountains. And that was something amazing, that in this cosmology we can see that this distance between, very long distance, may disappear, because this, what is really important, is certain ontological strength that can be built and constructed in the place when the yurt is settled, when the yurt is settled. And this is exactly the story. I mean, that they were celebrating something that they called Nutak. And Nutak, or Torsen Nutak, is the place when their mother gave them birth, when they were migrating with animals and stayed in the yurt, in this very concrete place. So those people, business people, politicians, for instance, come to the very place that they imagined that they were born, and they literally roll down on the ground to acquire, to obtain the vital force that is somehow present in this very place. But this is really complicated ontology, really complicated cosmology to understand. And when I was going through this fieldwork, I also looked at another Kirsten Hastrup's work, recent work, Tula as Frontier, and I realized that this is so akin to her work. I mean, that kind of vast resource like sea in the very in the high Arctic, or like desert and semi-desert lands in Mongolia are parts of the very unstable liquid environment. It can be considered as a resource, can be considered as a kind of obstacle, as a distance, as a place that is not existing at certain moment, and you can just travel through very effectively. So it's a kind of moment that is created anew, and it's really something unstable. And as Kirsten wrote in This Understanding the Frontier, and she called this Tula as a sort of a frontier in anthropological sense. It's not simply a place of potential gains, mostly from the outsider's perspective. It is also a time of particular quality between lost possibilities and not yet emerging opportunities. And so what I want to conclude about this fieldwork is the situation that I found this kind of cosmology, which is unstable, which is liquid, which is contemporary, which is entangled in capitalist forces, especially in Mongolia and also in Greenland. But what is really important is discovering the point that people do not, maybe I will read just 2 lines of my own article. So in this way, people do not merely respond using magical or spiritual means to fulfill their economic needs, nor do they psychology retreat to the former cosmological system. It is rather the situation about producing a new capitalist throne that was only triggered by rapid change. It contains non-capitalist diversity. The new socio-economic world may be conceived as a transversal sphere containing a self-reproducing interplay of political, economic, and spiritual forces which are neither activated anew nor simply continued in the previous form. So this is the situation, that this is not merely the response to the ongoing situation, nor it is the situation that, of retreat to the former world. It is something that we produce anew. It is really difficult to understand. So I went through these new publications by Kirsten and Hastrum, and I feel this moment that also Eva was telling about the situation that, and if I may to say that here, I mean that I found a big inspiration that I find in your text, in your works, the moment that you feel that really confident in your field knowledge, in your anthropological knowledge making that is opened and this is something that how I understand professorship and being a professor, because if we go to etymology of this word, it means that it's something who profess, who openly declare something, but it means that somebody has really believed what she or he is saying. And it means that she or he is really grounded in what she or he is knowing, and the skill of knowledge making, which is still open and still changing, is really amazing. And I felt very much this moment of anthropological knowledge making, which is based on this very conviction of this sense that we believe what we are doing, not we believe, but we believe in the sense that we gain our own experience, and this is experience enabled us to say something, at least provisionally, initially, about the contemporary world. Thank you very much.